The pink pill is the pink pill now. Put your piggies up now, up now, up. Live well to the extreme now. Put your pinkies up now, up now, up.
Hey, it's Pinky. You're on the Pink Pill YouTube channel. Be a love and like, share, and subscribe. Pinky's up.
I recently had an interview with a beautiful young woman who is working on a research project at Harvard. She wanted to interview me about hypergamy, the Black femininity movement, and the progress that Black women are making in that regard. But I ended up also interviewing her and asking her about how she is going to maximize her opportunities being at the most elite university in the United States, where she's going to have a network of potential people who will most definitively be the future masters of the universe. This is some of the things that I cover in the Pink Pill for College. It is a comprehensive course that really goes into a lot of detail on how young Black women can maximize their opportunities and build their social capital at a time in their lives that really makes it the easiest to do so. So, without further ado, you get to be a fly on the wall and listen to this interview. And if you want to know more about the Pink Pill courses, go to getpinkpill.com.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, prior to me laying it out in the way that I did about the potential of what a network that you could have at Harvard, was this something that was that occurred to you? Like, do you have a real understanding of the huge potential that someone who looks like you with a mind like you has?
Mm-hmm. Let me see. I'm trying to think, how far back do I want to go? um, so I guess I'll start with my mom. I'll give you like the brief synopsis and then try and move it up a bit. So my mom, by the time I was about 5 years old, my mom was like, okay, um, dating Black men isn't doing much for me, and staying within this community bubble isn't doing much for me. So I'm going to try my luck elsewhere. And I grew up watching her not always making the best decisions, but always leaving situations that did not serve her very quickly. Like with a quickness, she was
Mm-hmm.
gone. And I think that I didn't notice how radical that was for a Black woman, because I just thought, oh, that's normal. She doesn't care. And then as I got older, I realized, oh my gosh, wow. And when I came to Harvard, I how do I want to say this? When I got there, I felt like I wanted to be open to receiving any opportunities that came my way. And I knew that that wasn't going to happen if I only stayed within one small bubble. Um, but I think for a long time, it made me feel like I was kind of tribeless, because I had Black friends and I knew Black women and Black men and other people of color on campus. But because I didn't want to stay kind of situated in one tiny blob, I would try and move around. And what I found was that when you aren't so hyper focused on being around people who look exactly like you and who think exactly like you do find a lot of opportunity elsewhere. It just takes a while. But if you stick with it, then you will, I guess, reap the benefits of moving around. So, to answer your question, think I would say yes. Before I came across your content and other people who make similar, who have a similar presence online, I recognized that even though it was very difficult, it was overall very beneficial to try and experience everything and talk to everyone and um, use what you have to build yourself into an improved version of yourself and to also build relationships with other people. And I guess that all circles back to my mom because I never really saw her stick around in situations that didn't serve her when I was growing up.
Mm.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Um, so
And my mom is an American, so I don't know if that was part of it, but she grew up in my family's Beijing and she grew up in England. So she came here kind of as an outsider to the Black American community. And she kind of became disillusioned because I think when she arrived here, she thought, oh my gosh, I'm around all these Black people in the 90s. She came in 93 and she thought that she was going to have this huge extended family of Black friends and she was going to find someone to be with who was just wonderful because the Black community in England is so small. And that didn't happen for her. And so she went through this period of disillusionment over about 4 or 5 years. And then she was like, oh, I understand now. But yeah.
mhm. So how did you get to Harvard? How
Mhm.
did you, that's a pretty big deal. How'd you get there?
Yeah. It's always a hard question to answer because I feel like most people they can just say, well, I was at high school and I did these extracurriculars and had decent grades and then I applied. But for me, I actually went through a lot during my high school experience. I moved like 15, maybe 10, 15 times.
Wow.
And I ended up moving out when I was 16 to live with my older sister in my grandmother's house um, because I was having a lot of issues with my mom because she has undiagnosed mental health problems, probably just one, but we're not sure what it is. But a hallmark of her behavior is that she seems to struggle with attaching consequences to actions. So she'll do something very impulsively, which sometimes benefits her if it's, say, walking away from a relationship dynamic that isn't serving her, but it also has placed her into so many dangerous situations. And so when I was 16, I ended up moving out, and this was halfway through my high school experience. So I was 2 years in, and then I left and moved to New York, where I am now. And I was kind of thrown into this completely different high school setup because the way they do admissions and graduation requirements are completely different than where I came from. And so I, at one point, was taking like 7 classes, and I would be at school from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I had to retake a bunch of state exams. It was crazy. But I was like, I need to graduate and go to college so that I can look back and see this as a contained experience in my life instead of my entire life story. So I just kind of stayed to myself and worked on graduating. And I remember I said, oh, I think I'm going to apply to Harvard. And one of my aunts, I'll never forget, she was like, I don't think you're going to get into Harvard, but good luck. And I was like, I'm going to prove her wrong. I'm not going to tell her though. I'm just quietly going to prove her wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied to Harvard and maybe 20 other schools. And I ended up getting into, I think I applied to more than 20 schools actually, but I ended up getting into like 18 of them. And the funny thing is that every Ivy League I applied to rejected me. Um, Brown, UPenn, you name it. And I was like, okay, I clearly am not getting into an Ivy League school, but that's okay because I wasn't obsessed with an Ivy League education. It was just something I wanted to try to get into. So I was like, you know what? If I have to go to Brooklyn College or a state school or maybe a liberal arts school out of New York State, I'm fine. I don't mind. And Harvard was the last school to release admissions. So I had gotten my acceptances, um, my rejections, and I actually forgot about the Harvard email that was going to reveal if you got in or not. And I was like, oh, I'm not checking that. When I did finally remember, so I got the email and then I didn't even open it for like 2 days because I was 110% sure that that was going to say, oh, thank you for applying. But no. So
Yeah.
I was like, man, I'm not checking that email. I'm going to go and watch such and such movie when I get home from school. And then I'm going to get some snacks because I was in my senior year of high school and I had a little job. So I had spending money. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to Glossier. I'm going to do this. Forget that email. And then I was like, well, let me check. So 2 days go by and I was like, let me check this email just in case. And then I saw that it said congratulations. And I remember it didn't even hit me. I was just sitting at the computer and I was like, this is obviously a glitch. Why are they playing with my emotions? And I kept reading and it was like, welcome to the class of 2022, blah, blah, blah. And I was like,
Oh
oh my
my.
gosh.
Mm-hmm.
And so my sister, who was in grad school at the time and wasn't home, I was like, okay, well, I have to tell her. And my grandmother, she was in Barbados, so she wasn't here either. So it was so funny because I felt like I'd been through this crazy experience to find out that I got into Harvard and none of my family's home.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I was like, oh man, no one was home and no one got home for like 3 hours. So by the time they got in, I was like, you missed it. And my sister came to the door to yell at me actually, because she was like, why didn't you take out the garbage? And I was like, oh, I forgot I got into Harvard. And she was like, I'm tired of you lying. Why are you? She was like, I can't believe that is the dumbest, I can't, that's the stupidest shit I ever heard in my life. And I was like, I'm not lying. I don't mean to curse, but that's what she said. And I was like, I'm not lying. I really forgot I got into Harvard. And she was like, did the dog eat your homework too? And then I remember I pulled up the letter again online and I turned the computer to her and I was like, look, I'm not lying. Here it is. And then she starts crying. She was like, oh
Aw.
my gosh. And then my grandmother got in and we told her, and she couldn't believe it either. My grandmother, she didn't get past 8th grade. She was done with school at 14 and had my father when she was like 15.
Wow.
Um, and she went back to school years later, but she did not have like a formal education experience. So she couldn't believe it. And then I told my mom, and she told everyone. So, yeah, that was my experience getting into Harvard. But I didn't visit the campus because my grandmother doesn't have a driver's license in America. Um, my sister was really busy with the end of her graduation. What am I trying to say? With her graduate experience. So she couldn't really take me. No one had the time. Um, so I didn't see the campus for another, say, 6 or 7 months. And then that's when I was formally introduced to Harvard. But yeah, that's the story.
Wow. And what's your major?
I'm majoring in sociology and I'm minoring, but at Harvard it's called a secondary in ethnicity, migration, and rights. So I basically study people and human society, civilization, and culture all day.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Mhm. I tried to
So,
do chemistry, but it did not work out.
no, chemistry is tough,
Yeah.
but we need people like you, you know, humans need to be studied. Humans are fascinating.
Hmm.
So, I guess my next question is, how are you actively trying to make connections with other people while on campus, um, establishing a network, friendships, etc.?
Hmm. One thing I found particularly helpful is trying to meet people outside of school, but in school related activities. So what I did my freshman year, for example, was I signed up to travel to Brazil for 3 months to do study abroad. And that's actually how I ended up meeting one of my best friends at Harvard. He was also participating in the program, and we never would have met each other if we weren't both in Brazil for that program. And then after that, when I got home, I kind of made it a note to myself to engage with people in extracurriculars because I found that I think for me, I was, I think I came into school thinking I was going to meet a lot of like minded people and friends and stuff. But what ended up happening was everyone kind of splintered into their cliques. And I also think that Harvard is such a high pressure environment that people in classes are not chatting to each other. You're not going to make friends in the lab or bumping into someone in the library. So you really do have to work to make friends outside of class. So
Mm-hmm.
I joined a singing group. Um, and I also joined a charity that teaches students how to like read and write and about history in a community center near our campus. And that's how I met two of my other really close friends. And they're also people I never would have met if I wasn't in that program because they're not even in the bubble of my major. They're pre med. So we never would have crossed paths. None of our classes were the same. None of um, our schedules were completely different. We never would have met. And I found success in doing that, but it's become much more difficult with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when it comes to building a network, even as hard as you try, it has become so difficult because of lockdown.
But the lockdown will eventually be over.
Yeah, and then we're going to go back to school. And it's funny because a lot of people at my school have been talking about how they feel like they don't have friends anymore because they stopped talking to a lot of the people who were their best friends over lockdown. And I think it kind of speaks to this idea that sometimes your friendships are built on convenience. And it makes me wonder if you have a network, if it's all built on convenience and whose schedule is similar to yours, as opposed to maybe like meaningful emotional relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've done,
Yeah, that takes a lot of work. That takes a
yeah.
lot of emotional capital and
Mhm.
investment.
So,
And friends are often friends because of proximity and frequency.
mhm,
So yeah, I mean, there's certain components of what makes a friendship. And I was reading a book on how to make friends, and there's four components. It's proximity, like how close you are to that person,
mhm,
frequency, how often you see that person, intensity, which is the quality of the interaction, and the duration of that.
mhm,
So that's the formula for creating long lasting friendships. And it's based on a lot to do with time and location.
mhm,
And so, because the amount of time and the location meaning the proximity, how close you are and how much time you're able to spend, like that's the goal, and how to um, uh, develop deep relationships.
mhm,
So that means that you have to figure out opportunities repetitively, frequently, with the type of people that you want to form bonds with.
mhm. And I think an interesting thing at Harvard is that some of the students who, how do I say this? Some of the relationships that could offer the greatest potential for networking are hard to make because those individuals stay within their group. So, for example, just like there was a black table, there was another table which was exclusively for the children of politicians. And
Mhm.
it was so funny because you would just walk past all these tables and they were so segregated. And then you would see this tiny table with like 5 people in the corner in the dark. And those kids, as quiet as they were the children of like this multi-millionaire politician or this tycoon in such and such industry who's also the governor of Texas or something like that. So it can be difficult to break into those circles at Harvard because even though they're there, they're kind of closed to non-members.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's resulted in a culture of finals clubs, which are the Harvard equivalent of fraternities and sororities, except they're based much more on legacy than social popularity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I was a first generation student and I didn't even know about finals clubs. And there were students coming in who their parents and their grandparents and their parents were in finals clubs. And they're like these secret societies that you would really never know anything about unless
Mm-hmm.
you engaged with someone who comes from a legacy like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that sense, it is very closed and difficult to break into, but not impossible. I think it's better to try and make individual relationships with those people as opposed to trying to break in a
Yes.
club setting.
Yes. So there's a book written in satire, but it actually does have solid advice. I think it's out of print, but you can still get it on Amazon, I believe. It's called The Social Climber's Bible. Highly recommend you get it. And in the book, they talk about in order to permeate these closed groups, you need a turtle.
A turtle.
A turtle, not an actual turtle, but the person that um, can get you in is the turtle. And the turtle is sort of the member of the group, but is on the periphery, kind of the oddball, but open
Mhm,
to establishing a relationship with you that then you then cultivate, and as an act of reciprocation they introduce you to the group, and it represent and they use the turtle symbolism because you ride the turtle who slowly
mhm.
um puts you allows for you to cross that barrier. and and it even has advice on how do you treat your turtle and how you
Oh my god.
it's a funny term, but it's basically like you target the people who show any sort of openness to you, and you nurture that relationship, and you're playing the long game. You're not trying to like, hey, hook me up with blah blah blah. You're playing the long game, and you're nurturing that relationship, and then over time that person then introduces you, because yes, those groups are very closed off and they don't welcome outsiders without some sort of references. And so it's like, okay, so this turtle is your reference. Okay, they say you're okay, all right, you're okay.
That is so funny, but it's true.
Yes, it is.
Mhm,
It is absolutely true. Um, I did I did an entire course on this called the Pink Pill for College,
mhm,
teaching particularly Black women to maximize their opportunities while they're there. And like that's what you need to do. Like, and if you get good grades, see if you can get into the group of, I forgot the name of the organization that um is is for high achieving students who have a certain GPA. You
I
need to be
believe
in
it's
those
Dean's
groups.
List.
No, but yeah, yes, there's a dean's list, but there's actually clubs. It's a Greek club that's just for like the cerebral.
Mhm,
I would find out what those clubs were and join those clubs. Join. I know Harvard has a ton of different clubs.
So
Join
many,
clubs that,
hundreds,
huh?
hundreds.
Yes. And so you need to join, look through the hundreds of clubs and see how that might be an opportunity for you to meet and interact and facilitate a relationship with a turtle who can take you deeper into the
Mhm.
rabbit hole.
But that term is so funny.
I know. It's funny, but it's true, right? You ride the turtle who's slow and steady, but eventually wins the race.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't like the person.
Yes, it's not, you're not using them. You
Mhm,
establish a friendship and you should care about that person.
mhm.
Um,
But I
and you
think
shouldn't
that,
use them, but it's a form of networking. It's not using, if you're reciprocating the kindness. You can't just be a user. You can't just be like, give me, give me, give me, give me. You
mhm,
have to also give value to that person. Like, if the person has some sort of weakness or deficiency in something that you have a strength in, then you can go in and help them with that, and therefore you are adding value to that person.
but I think it's so interesting that Black women seem to be one of the only groups of people who are taught that acting in self-interest in any capacity is bad.
Yes, I know. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You're
Mhm,
not, you're fake. Yeah. And again, I have to ask the question, um how's that working out for us?
mm.
How's it working out?
And then I think the funny thing is that because we don't seem to have a fully fleshed out understanding of how to balance self-interest and giving, I think we are always swinging to different ends of the pendulum, where at one point it's, oh, I need to give or I can't be selfish. And then on the other end, you want to be like Lori Harvey.
Right.
And
And you just want to be mercenary. Like there's no middle.
Mhm,
It's like one, it's binary. Either you're, completely unselfish, or you're completely self-interested, mercenary.
mhm. And it's also
Right.
not working. Being a mercenary or being completely selfless, sorry. Neither one of those works. You have to
Absolutely.
be in the middle. And I would say, in my opinion, in the middle, but leaning a bit more towards being perhaps a little too selfish, just because as a woman, I think the whole world is designed to take from you. So I think that it might be better for you to be just a little bit too selfish, perhaps in your youth, and then balance it out more as you get older. But I think you should be very self oriented, not selfish or cruel, but completely invested in taking care of yourself and doing well when you're from the age of, say, 18 to 25. That's a time where I think um, your decisions will impact you for the rest of your life because it's your first step into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are perhaps too giving or spineless, it can put you in a situation that just changes the trajectory of your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I went off on a tangent.
No, I mean, and here's another way too. Like you should, I know that each of the different schools have study rooms,
Mhm,
like biology, engineering, um, people, um, people who are engineers. It's still very male dominated, and they tend to be a little bit socially awkward,
mhm,
but want to have, like you're a pretty girl. So
mhm.
you need to be in the line of sight of these people. So when you're
Yeah,
studying
there's
for an exam, you need to go to the engineering study room.
and
You need to
there's
be going to
cross
the
events.
biology study, like that's where you need to go, into these male dominated spaces, and just be in the line of sight and just be studying and looking sweet and beautiful like you are.
And there's a lot of cross events between Harvard and the surrounding colleges, and one of them is
Mhm.
MIT. And
Mm-hmm.
I went to an event held by both schools jointly, and it was crazy because about 200 people went. It was mostly MIT students and Harvard STEM students, so like the physics majors and the
Mm-hmm.
chemistry majors. And I'm there. I don't know what anyone's talking about. And I met so many people. Um,
Yes. That's what you need to do. And you also need to you need to create a dossier of people that you want to cultivate relationships with.
mhm,
Meaning that when you make those connections, you get to know them, and you find out when their birthdays are, like where they live, about their background. The more interest you show in other people, the more flattered and open they will be. People love it when you show a genuine interest in them.
mhm. But
So,
yeah.
girl, I want you got to do it for us. You got to do it for the Black women. You need to go there and work it. My
I will.
sister-in-law found her husband at Harvard. They were in Harvard. They were at Harvard together.
Wow.
And that's how she met him. And he's a doctor and he makes over $600,000 a year.
Wow. And it's
Hmm.
funny because in those spaces, that's very casual. It's not a big thing. Like you won't be called a high value man for
Hmm. No,
graduating from
none of
Harvard
that stuff
around a
doesn't
bunch of other
exist.
people.
That
Hmm.
stuff doesn't exist. It's stupid. You say that outside of the spaces where we're seeing it and hearing it from the people we're seeing it and hearing it from. Um, the real ones don't do that. That's
Mm,
why it's so comical to me, because I know, and these people are in my peripheral lives,
hmm.
and it's a lot of it is BS.
Hmm. It reminds me of a funny quote I saw, and it was like an alpha male would never call himself that.
Right. No, his actions show
Hmm.
that, you know. So I say all that to say, yes, please, please, please take my advice,
Hmm. I will.
because you're a junior and now you're going to be a senior. That means you only
Hmm.
have one more year to go.
Yeah,
You
and
need to make the
it's
last
flown
year
by.
count. You need to make it count, girl.
Hmm. Especially if we can return to campus.
Yeah, you're going to. You're going to. Um, you're going to return. You need to be ready to hit the ground running when that happens.